Hello, and welcome back to Breaking the Narrative. This is a show where we break down media narratives, challenge assumptions, and uncover the truth about the violence of abortion, the value of every human being, and the power that we have to protect the vulnerable. Today, I'm joined by Emily Geiger, the Director of Education and Outreach at Equal Rights Institute. Emily trains pro-life advocates to have productive conversations with pro-choice people. So if you'd like to learn how to do that, keep watching. But first, if you have not already listened to my last two conversations, please go check those out as well. I got the chance to speak with Monica Snyder from Secular Pro-Life about whether pro-life laws save lives or, as some people have claimed, actually put women's lives at risk. And do pro-lifers need to rethink the way that we define the word abortion? I also got to talk with Trevor Polo from Protect Life Michigan about how his organization is using persuasive messaging campaigns backed by data to shift entire communities to become more pro-life. Trevor and Monica both have so much insight, and even if you're someone who's already very familiar with the pro-life movement, I think you're going to get a lot out of both conversations. And now, here's my conversation with Emily. Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk with you today just because I'm such a big fan of the work that you're doing and that Equal Rights Institute is doing. And it was actually the Equipped for Life course by ERI that was kind of one of my introductions to pro-life apologetics as a high school student. And then even more recently, we had the chance to work together back when I was leading the Life Advocates Club here at Grove City College. Emily was our club coach, and she just did so much to help me and the other club members be even more effective in our mission, which is to train students in pro-life apologetics. So that's kind of what I wanted to begin by talking about. So you work for Equal Rights Institute, and their mission is to train pro-life advocates to think clearly, reason honestly, and argue persuasively. So can you kind of tell me, like, what does it mean to be a pro-life advocate, and why is it important to do all of those things?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lily. It's a pleasure to be here. I think that's a really great question because I would define the word pro-life advocate much more broadly than I think most people do. Like, I think if you ask people, what is a pro-life advocate, they would describe someone like me, someone who has a full-time job doing pro-life advocacy, trying to convince people to become pro-life, trying to further pro-life legislation, those kinds of things. I think that's what most people imagine a pro-life advocate or a pro-life activist to be. But I believe that any person who is pro-life is a pro-life advocate. Because the reality is, whether you know it or not, there are pro-choice people in your life. You are meeting them in your families, in your communities. And how you carry yourself every day as a pro-life person affects how other people see the pro-life position, assuming that they know that you are pro-life or they maybe even have an inkling that you are pro-life. Even if you never talk about abortion directly with that person, I think it's incredibly valuable to just be a pro-life person out in society because you start to break down stereotypes about who pro-life people are and what they stand for. Just being a young pro-life woman, like both of us are, we are inherently breaking down stereotypes about who pro-lifers are and helping people to become more open to the pro-life position just because they can see themselves in us in some small way. They're like, I relate to you. So I believe that if you are pro-life, you are inherently a pro-life advocate because everything you do, how you carry yourself, automatically reflects on the pro-life position and it makes people come closer to it or move further away from it potentially based on your behavior. So I think that how we act matters, how we treat other people and how we think about this issue and ultimately talk about this issue, which is really kind of the second part of your question there of what we do at ERI is we try to help pro-life people to think clearly, reason honestly, and argue persuasively. I also like to explain what we do in a much simpler way as to say, I try to help pro-life people to be less weird. That's really what that means to me is I want to help pro-life people to make more good arguments and fewer, frankly, bad ones. And I want to try to help pro-life people to connect relationally with people who think very differently from them so that we can actually engage with their ideas. If you think clearly about something, that means that you are able to think through arguments for yourself and not just have memorized talking points that I give you. Like, yes, part of my job at ERI is I give pro-life people talking points and things to say. But I think it's far more important for pro-life people to understand pro-choice people really well. So that when a pro-choice person says something, you can think through that argument they're making and come up with your own very natural, organic response that really gets to the heart of what's going on for that person in front of you, not just some generic pro-choice person that you learned from reading a book how you should respond to. And when you argue persuasively, it comes very naturally out of that. Because if you're able to think clearly through it and say things that are going to be interesting and relevant to what that pro choice person just said, you're able to argue with them persuasively. You're able to do things that will make them more open to the pro life position. And that last piece in the middle, reason honestly, that's the idea that I think that pro-life people need to genuinely explore the issue here. I think that it's a bad thing for society. And I'm not just talking about abortion. I'm talking about any like political, religious, moral issue. I think it's really a bad thing for society if we all just automatically believe the things that we were told as kids to believe. Like, I grew up pro-life because that's what my parents told me to be and what my church told me to be. And don't get me wrong, I'm very glad that my parents and my church told me to be pro-life. But because that was the only reason that I was pro-life, when I went off to college and I was dumped into a very pro-choice college environment, I almost lost my pro-life beliefs because I was suddenly faced with all of these questions that I didn't know how to answer. And I had never owned it for myself. I had never reasoned honestly through here's the strong pro life arguments, here's the strong pro choice arguments, and this is why I believe what I believe. I had no reason for what I believed, other than I just am going along with what I was taught. And so I want pro life people to be able to move beyond that, going along what they were taught, to really know the strongest arguments that exist and ultimately then be able to ground themselves in truth. I think that we shouldn't be afraid of asking questions, of reading the toughest pro-choice philosophy papers that there are in the world, because I'm dedicated to following the truth where it leads. And I think that if the pro-life position is true, and I'm awfully sure that it is, then that's where the truth will lead. And so that's what reasoning honestly means. I want to help pro-life people really follow that truth where it leads and not be afraid of engaging with those pro-choice arguments, which is what I was the first time I encountered them.
I want to get into a little bit of your story. Can you tell me how you first got involved in the pro-life movement?
So, as I said, I grew up Catholic, and so that meant that I was told to be pro-life. But I really had no good arguments for my position until I got to college. So my college environment was very, I'm going to even say anti-pro-life. Like, it was the fall of 2016, and our local pregnancy center, they provide free resources for pregnant and parenting individuals in our community. They were hosting their annual fundraising banquet. And they actually decided to do that fundraising banquet on my college campus. They just like rented out a ballroom. And when the students on campus found out that that was what was happening, they managed to organize literally hundreds of students to just line the hallways of our entire student union with signs screaming at the members of the community who had come to support free resources for pregnant and parenting families. That is what I walked into. I was quite frankly terrified to tell anyone that I was pro-life, which is why I kept my mouth shut for my whole first semester of college. I said nothing. I kept my head down and just did my classes and moved on. January of freshman year came along, and my one solid pro-life friend quite literally dragged me, kicking and screaming, to my very first pro-life club meeting. She had seen a poster for the pro-life club. She wanted to go. I really wanted to be friends with her, and so I agreed to go. And we showed up to that meeting and we single-handedly tripled the size of that club from 1 to 3 people. And that spring, the 3 of us started to try to do some stuff. And I'll be totally honest with you, every single thing that we tried to do that spring failed epically. Like, I remember one week that spring semester, we put up a hallway display. What I mean by that is we could, as a student club, reserve a hallway on campus right outside the cafeteria, and you were allowed to put whatever you wanted up on the walls of that hallway for an entire week. And so we designed our own display about abortion. We were super proud of it. We put it up on the walls, and it was vandalized 13 times in 1 week. And when I say vandalized, I mean destroyed. Like we had to reprint parts of that display 13 times and put it back up on the wall 13 times with money out of our own pockets, mind you, because we didn't have any money as a club. And every time I would submit these bias reports to our administration saying like, hello, there are kind of students vandalizing our stuff and they're not supposed to be allowed to do that. And my reports would basically just go into a black hole. Like, I don't know if anyone ever read them. They're probably sitting in a file cabinet back at St. Olaf somewhere. It was extremely frustrating. So the end of my freshman year comes along, and senior girl who had been running the club before my friend and I joined, she graduates, right? And so suddenly I found myself as the new co-president of the pro-life club by default, because there literally was no one else to take the job. And it was that summer, the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, that I literally got the email that changed my life forever. I had been having a lot of meetings with my little club, trying to figure out what we could do differently. Because it was incredibly evident to all of us that what we were doing was not working. And we needed to change course. But we had no idea what to do until one day in the middle of July when I got this email from my local pregnancy center saying, hey, we just discovered that there's this national pro-life organization called Equal Rights Institute that's dedicated to helping pro-life people actually reach pro-choice people. Do you want to take their Equipped for Life course? We'll pay for it for you. And I said, I mean, sure, great, free help, I'll take it. So that summer, I took the Equipped for Life course, and I figured out in about 2 seconds that that was the game changer I had been looking for. So my tiny club took that course, and immediately the fall of my sophomore year, we started going out to do outreach on our campus. And what I mean by outreach is we would set up a table outside the cafeteria with a sign on it that said, should abortion remain legal in the US? And there would be 3 signs hanging down from the table: a yes, a no, and an it depends. And trust me, students really wanted to voice their opinion on that question. So they started coming up to us by the hundreds every single week, and they would vote in our little poll, and then they would engage in conversation with one of my club members. Fast forward to my senior year of college, we have been doing this almost weekly for 3 straight years at this point. And everything about my campus had changed. The pro-life club, first of all, had exploded in size because there had always been pro-life students on my campus. But like me, they'd been absolutely terrified to say anything. But now they saw us out there having these conversations, and they saw that it was working. And so pro-life students just came out of the woodwork. But even more importantly than that to me is we saw this complete culture shift in how pro-choice people viewed pro-life people. I had so many conversations at that table that ended with the pro-choice person telling me how much they respected me and they respected the pro-life position, and that they had never heard such an intelligent and loving pro-life argument before. And yes, we saw students change their minds and actually become pro-life. We had vandalism that just completely ended by the time we got to the end of my senior year. Like my senior year, we had 1 vandalism the entire year, after we had had 13 vandalisms in 1 week my freshman year. And the administration actually responded to that vandalism, and they put the student who had done it through the disciplinary process. Like they actually looked at the security camera footage and did it. Whereas my freshman year, they would not give me the time of day. We had become, through doing this kind of outreach, the most respected and professional student organization on campus. People actually valued what we had to say. They wanted to come up and talk to us, even to the point that my senior year, that local pregnancy center that had like gotten kicked off of my campus, they came back and had their fundraising banquet on campus again. So the years in between, they had done their fundraising banquet somewhere else, which is not shocking. But my senior year, they came back and did it on our campus again, and not a single student protested it. That is the power of going out and actually talking to pro-choice people, of creating these spaces where we can engage with one another. And that's how I knew that this is what I wanted to do for a living. This had not been my career path. This had not been my plan. I was a vocal music education major. I have a K-12 music teaching license. And it was through doing hundreds of hours of outreach that I realized my real passion was talking about abortion and helping to change hearts and minds. And so I started working for ERI straight out of college, and here I am today.
Wow. That's incredible how you were able to kind of just through a few actions and conversations, it sounds like transform a whole community, like set off a series of events. That's really an incredible testament to the power of pro-life apologetics. Um, my next question, though, is kind of in a little bit of a different direction because I think that your experience initially with your school is probably very representative of a lot of schools right now. Um, but there are also communities like Grove City College. I think we're a good example of a school where actually most students are pro-life. I'm here with the Institute for Faith and Freedom. We're a Christian conservative organization, and I think about 90% of the students on campus have pro-life views. So it's kind of the majority. Even though there are certainly students who are pro-choice, it's not necessarily a conversation that's happening because people assume everyone is pro-life. And so I think maybe students like myself who are pro-life are not necessarily going to be super motivated to go out and do apologetics or learn apologetics. So I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to that type of situation, whether it's a college or some other community where the majority is already pro-life. Like, why should people in those communities still study pro-life apologetics?
You aren't going to be in that community forever. I was in that community in high school. All the way up until I got to college, I was in a community where everyone was pro-life, and so we didn't really talk about it. And even if that community extends to college or extends out into your future workplace, you are never going to be in that community forever. And sometimes you don't even know that you aren't in that community. Simply because it seems like people around you are pro-life often doesn't mean that they all are. There are closeted pro-choice people everywhere. I know now, looking back at my own high school where I thought everyone was pro-life, there were a lot more closeted pro-choice people than I thought. And because the issue of abortion was never really publicly talked about, those students didn't have a chance to voice their questions and concerns. And then when they left that community, they became pro-choice. And that's how I ultimately know now that there were a lot of students that were either pro-choice or leaning pro-choice when I was in high school because I see them now. I'm friends with them on social media and I see the kinds of things they're posting and they have changed their mind about the issue. But even if that's not true, even if your community is 100% pro-life and all of you will stay pro-life forever, which to be honest, I highly doubt, but let's assume that's true. I still think you have an obligation because when we go out into the other parts of our lives, we're going to meet other people that are pro-choice, and you're probably even meeting them now on social media. I am a huge advocate of standing up for life in all the areas of your life, and that means on social media even now, where I guarantee all of your friends are not pro-life. There are people posting things, you see them, I see them. And so having the tools to be able to respond to those things is really, really important and helpful, even just to say one thing to help people get out of their echo chamber. I often tell people who are scared of doing social media advocacy, you do not have to have all the answers, nor do you have to engage in some like 50 comment long thread. I think it is incredibly valuable if you see something that someone has posted that is pro-choice to just drop one piece of an argument and leave. Mute it. Don't even look back at the comments, but just say in the comments, hey, for the record, I don't agree with this. I think that XYZ maybe like persuades me to be pro-life because of blah, 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 blah. Mute it and leave. You are not going to change the mind of the person that you actually commented this under. That's not how people change their mind. But it is very helpful for other people that see this comment thread, for other people that are friends with that top person who posted it originally to see, hey, not everyone on the planet is pro-choice. There's just little bits of chinks in that armor because I think a lot of pro-choice people, especially pro-choice young people, live in a sphere where they truly think every young person on the planet is pro-choice. And you and I know that's very not true. Your college is a great example of that not being true. But simply dropping little pieces of, hey, here's an argument that I think about sometimes that helps me explain why I'm pro-life, helps others realize that they aren't in the echo chamber they thought they were. So even if you live in a pro-life sphere, I think we have an obligation to reach out and try to help other people in little ways to be able to combat this. You probably also have some people, maybe in your extended family or maybe in your future job. This is going to come up. So just because you live in this community now doesn't mean you will always be in a situation where no one around you is pro-life. And I think that even right now, there are people around you that are pro-choice, but there's going to be situations in your future. I promise you.
Yeah, I think the concept of echo chambers is a helpful way to think about it because pro-choice echo chambers are, a problematic and difficult as your experience kind of demonstrates. But I think also pro-life echo chambers can cause issues as well if it's assumed that everyone is pro-life and then you're not allowed to question that view, then you're not going to have your questions answered, kind of like you were saying. And so I think it's a good reminder that we shouldn't assume that everyone agrees with us. Yeah.
And I think it's also true that when you're in a pro-life echo chamber, you can be more susceptible to becoming pro-choice because you haven't been exposed to the toughest pro-choice arguments. Like I vividly remember the very first conversation I ever had on my college campus with a pro-choice person. This was before I had taken the Equip for Life course. It was my freshman year. We had put up that display, and a pro-choice person wanted to talk to me from the student newspaper about our display and the fact that it had been vandalized so many times. And they asked me a question about how, like, what would happen if a woman who was pregnant had her life at risk. I had never thought about that question before in my life because I had been in a pro-life echo chamber where we didn't really talk about abortion. Everyone was just pro-life. And I remember being just stuck. Like, I don't know how to answer that. That's actually a really good point. Should she be allowed to have an abortion? I don't know. Like I was like panicking in my own mind because I had never actually thought about this issue more than, well, everybody's pro-life, so we don't need to think about it. And I remember literally going to the bathroom so that I could pull my phone out and emergency Google how to answer that question. I do not want you to be in that situation at some point in your life. Like if you're living in this echo chamber, but you've never heard what are the toughest pro-choice arguments out there or never thought through how would I respond to that, you can be caught off guard really quickly and not have a great answer. And if I hadn't been able to find one, I would have been much closer to just becoming pro-choice because there's really good pro-choice arguments out there. I don't think that pro-choice arguments are dumb. Some pro-choice arguments are dumb, but there are really smart pro-choice arguments out there that we should expose ourselves to be prepared for.
Yeah, in a moment, I want to get into that more, what you think are the strongest pro-choice arguments. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how you think about persuasion and barriers to persuasion, because I think sometimes we can think about arguments as like you just make the best argument and that's all you have to do. And I think sometimes as a pro-life advocate, it's helpful to think about not just putting forward a good argument because we have really good arguments, but removing the things that are barriers to persuasion that prevent people from seeing the reality. So I'm sure there are many, but I'm curious what you see as the biggest things that are barriers to pro-life and pro-choice people having like meaningful conversations where they actually understand each other.
I love how you're using the word barriers because that's exactly how I would describe it. I think when we enter controversial conversations, really about any topic, abortion or anything else, if it's a controversial conversation, people are coming in with their walls up. And your first and most important job in this conversation is to get their walls to come down because it doesn't matter how good your arguments are. If their wall is up, they're not going to be able to hear those arguments. They're not going to land on them. And so you have to get that wall down in order for your arguments to matter. And so I think the biggest barriers we have in conversation is precisely those walls that pro-life and pro-choice people don't take the time to try to get the other person's walls down. They just simply go into fight mode and start like battling arguments back and forth. And fight mode sometimes looks like literal screaming matches, but more often it just looks like I call it the pro-life robot. The pro-life person who just has a lot of arguments and is just like, I'm going to say my argument. And then I'm going to say another argument. Then I'm going to say another argument. And if I just say enough arguments back to back to back to back, they're going to have to change their mind. I don't think that's how psychology works. I don't think that's how people actually change their minds. Most people are not humble enough to realize that the arguments you're making are better than the arguments they have in their head. They have to actually see themselves in you in some small way. They have to feel safe in this conversation. They have to feel like you are a person that they trust and they respect. So, a couple of tools that I use to help with that. I love asking clarification questions. I'm not talking about gotcha questions. I'm not talking about leading questions. I'm talking about genuine, I am trying to understand you questions. And I deliberately spend several minutes at the beginning of my conversations with pro choice people just asking those kinds of honest clarification questions to really get a picture of where they're coming from and what the arguments are that are persuasive to them, why they are pro choice. I do this for several reasons. There's a persuasion tactic there in that if I can understand more thoroughly why they're actually pro choice, I'm going to be able to make a much more persuasive argument because I really understand why they're pro choice and then I can target my arguments towards that core reason. But I think more importantly, I really want to show them that I care what they think and that I am going to give them the space to talk. I think the number one reason that pro choice people like come up yelling to a pro-life person. Maybe they see a pro-life person standing on the sidewalk outside of an abortion clinic and they come up yelling to them. I think it's because they feel like their viewpoint is not going to be heard. They're afraid this pro-life person is just going to shut them out, is not going to hear them. And so the only way that I can get across what I want to say is to get in their face and yell at them and talk so fast that the pro-life person won't have time to respond. And instead, I want to show them, no, I want to hear what you have to say. I'm going to give you so much space. I'm not going to interrupt you. And therefore, they are much more inclined to follow suit and to not interrupt me and to want to hear what I have to say because I have showed them that this conversation, it's cool. It's chill. We can just talk. It's fine. So asking those kinds of clarification questions along with finding common ground. Oh, I think this is a huge barrier between pro-life and pro-choice people is that we think we are far more different than we actually are. Pro-life people have crazy stereotypes of pro-choice people in their heads. And pro-choice people have crazy stereotypes of pro-life people in our heads. And so the more that I can point out common ground that I have with pro-choice people, like literally any time a pro-choice person says a nugget of something that I agree with, I try to point it out. And it can be a really subtle. It can be like, oh yeah, no, totally. Like things like that, just like kind of little interjections that say, yeah, I agree with that thing that you just said. It can be longer too. Sometimes it's whole paragraphs or minutes long tangents we'll go off of. And this just helps them to realize we are not as different as they thought. And when we can create that kind of space where this is chill, we start to respect each other. There's just genuine interest in having this conversation because we trust that it's not going to turn into a screaming match. That's when people's walls fall down. And then you can say arguments that they're actually going to hear. They're going to have the humility to hear it, to want to think about it, and then to respond to you with an interesting counterpoint or another question, because this is a place where like what you're saying is landing on them and they can even react to it.
I'm curious if you have any specific examples or things that you see come up again and again about like misunderstandings that pro-life and pro-choice people have of each other or assumptions that both sides make.
Yeah. I think that pro-life people generally assume that pro-choice people are much more ignorant about biology than they typically are. Now, there are some pro-choice people that are ignorant about the biology of pregnancy. I do not deny that. But I think most pro-choice people, especially college-educated pro-choice people, know more about the biology of pregnancy than most pro-lifers give them credit for. Most pro-lifers think, okay, if I can just show them that this is a living member of the species Homo sapiens, it is a biological human, that's it. That's all I have to do. They're going to become pro-life. And that's not the argument that's going on for most pro-choice people. That is actually probably not going to help you much at all in this conversation because most pro-choice people are being driven by concerns about women's rights, about bodily autonomy, and they're far less concerned about the nature of whatever this thing is inside the woman's body. They're like, I kind of don't care. Sure, it can be a biological human. That's not really relevant here. The woman who is carrying the baby, that is the thing that's relevant, and she needs to be protected. And so most pro-life people are misunderstanding kind of the motivation behind the pro-choice position, and they're misunderstanding what pro-choice people know and don't know. And so I think that causes a lot of pro-life people to be less persuasive because they often come into the conversation just instantly wanting to talk about the biology, the nature of this human, rather than meeting the pro-choice argument where it's at. So I think that that's a huge misunderstanding that happens there. On the flip side, I think that pro-choice people often assume that pro-life people don't care about women. They think that we are pro-birth, not in the sense that like we don't do anything to help kids, but in the sense that like we are very focused on this fetus. It needs to be born. That's the most important thing. The woman involved here, not really that important. This is kind of her fault anyways. I mean, she's the one that had sex. She got into this situation. So we're not really that interested in helping her, or at least we'll only help her to the extent that it gets the baby born. And then maybe we'll try to help the baby after that, but the woman, not really our concern. I think that that's a very easy stereotype for pro-choice people to have too, because I think pro-life people often spend so much of their time talking about the fetus, talking about the nature of this biological human, that it can come across like we have something that I call fetus tunnel vision. Like the only thing in the world we care about is fetuses. And I know that that is not true. I know that pro-life people care about so much more than fetuses. And we also care about helping women both during and after pregnancy. But I think a lot of pro-choice people don't realize that. And so they misunderstand our motivations here. And sometimes even misunderstand it to the point where they think that we want to punish women, or that we want to punish women through having pregnancy. Like being pregnant is essentially punishment for having sex. They often have that stereotype of me. They often think that we're also just all crazy religious conservatives, which is really funny when I don't use a single religious argument in my conversations with people. So I think there's a lot of stereotypes both ways. I could go on forever, but I think those are probably the key ones that I see most often.
So when you're talking with pro-choice people, whether that's like in person or maybe online, um, what are the arguments for abortion that kind of come up again and again? Or maybe some of the arguments that you think are the most difficult that pro-life people struggle with the most? And then how should we kind of respond to them?
Yeah. So I think the single most common thing that I hear from pro-choice people is concerns about women's rights to their bodies. Now, these can come in a couple different forms, these kind of bodily autonomy or bodily rights arguments. But most pro-choice people are saying something along the lines of women's rights to do what they want with their bodies shouldn't be interfered with by the government. Some pro-choice people would even go so far as to say, I don't think abortion is a good thing. I probably wouldn't have one myself. But I don't think that we can restrict the freedom of women to make that choice. It's the kind of thing that should be legal, even if maybe we should do things to try to reduce it. Now, certainly I don't think that the abortion lobby, as I'll call it, very people that are advocating for abortion, those people have very much moved away from this kind of mantra of safe, legal, rare abortion. But the average pro-choice person is not pro-abortion. They don't like abortion. They don't think it's a good thing. But they do think that it's a woman's right. She should be able to make that choice, even if they wouldn't do it for themselves. So those kinds of arguments really sidestep the question of what the human is, what this fetus is, what other thing is involved here. And they just ask, what kinds of rights do women have to their bodies? Is abortion the kind of thing that a woman should have the legal right to do? Even if maybe I don't like it personally, is it the kind of thing we should be able to do? And so I think in that kind of realm, really the strongest possible version of this argument is the idea of organ donation. It's something that I didn't used to hear very often from pro-choice people, and now it has started to become the single most common argument that I hear on college campuses, primarily because it's actively being taught in a lot of philosophy one-on-one classes on college campuses. So this is the idea that pregnancy is like organ donation in the sense that if you were dying of kidney failure, Lily, and I was the only person in the whole world who was capable of donating my kidney to you, I shouldn't be forced to do that by the government. It'd be really nice, obviously, if I donated my kidney to you. We should encourage people to donate more kidneys. We should make it easy for people to donate more kidneys. But the government shouldn't legally say, I must donate my kidney to you, and like I could get in trouble if I refuse. And that in their minds is very similar to pregnancy. Because in pregnancy, we have this scenario where there is a woman who is essentially donating her organs to this other human. Please note, we're talking about the fetus as another human here. Like it's being made analogous to you dying of kidney failure over here. They are willing to assume, at least for the sake of argument, that the fetus is a human just like you or I. And they're saying it would be great if the woman would be willing to donate her organs to this other human. Like we should encourage that. We should make it as easy as possible for her to do that. But you can't legally require people to donate their organs. That would be wrong. In the same way that it would be wrong if I was forced to donate my kidney to you, it would be wrong if I was forced to donate my kidney to this fetus. So I have the right to have an abortion in order to be able to essentially get out of that, in order to refuse to donate my organs. It's really easy for me to see why that argument is so popular once you fully understand it. It's so popular because it makes a lot of sense. Like there are things wrong with it. We'll talk about how to respond to it. But on its face, it's a very persuasive idea. We don't generally want to be forcing people to donate their organs to others. That feels really icky. It feels like a violation of people's bodily autonomy, which we generally respect. I mean, bodily autonomy is one of the reasons that sexual assault is so wrong. Like, we are very used to in our society. This is your body. You have the right to make choices about what happens. Other people do not get to use your body without your consent. I mean, if you go to the doctor's office, you have to sign like 6,000 consent forms before they're going to do any sort of procedure to you because you have the right to control this space. And so something coming in and stealing something from you, especially something that's personal as your organs, is inherently wrong. And so that argument is very persuasive on its face the first time that you hear it. And I think that that's why pro-choice people are using it more and more and more. I think that's also a great argument for why pro-life people, even in spaces like Grove City, need to be engaged with pro-life apologetics. Because I'll be honest, the first time I heard that argument, that kind of organ donation framing, I was very persuaded by it. I was like, I don't have a good response to that. I'm going to have to think about this because maybe I have to become pro-choice. So if you're not engaged with thinking about pro-life apologetics and understanding how to respond, you could easily get caught flat-footed with that kind of thing. So let's talk about how to respond to it. When I think about the idea of organ donation, it is analogous to pregnancy in some ways. They're not making this up completely, but there's a pretty big disanalogy. There's a pretty big reason that organ donation is not comparable to pregnancy. And that's when you think about the options that are available to you. So let's back up to that organ donation scenario where you, Lily, are dying of kidney failure. All right. I think in this scenario, I basically have three options. I could help you, which would be me donating my kidney to you, which would be super nice. You wouldn't die. Yay. I could not help you, which would be me refusing to donate my kidney to you. You would die. I'd be very sad, but I shouldn't be like legally in trouble for that. I also hypothetically have this third option. I could kill you. Like I could just come at you right now with a gun, eliminate your need for my kidney. We all know that should not be a legal option on the table for me, right? But I technically have all three of those options. I can help, I can not help, or I can kill. The problem is not all three of those options even exist from the get-go in every scenario. I can think of other examples in society, but just to get straight to the point, if we think of pregnancy, there is no "I just refuse to help you" option. It literally doesn't exist. Like if it did, that would be the equivalent of us like Trek beaming a fetus out of the mother's womb and into an artificial womb so that she doesn't have to be pregnant anymore and the fetus would be fine. If we had that technology, that could be the equivalent of an "I just refuse to help you" option. But we don't have that technology. And when you're pregnant, your only options are to help or to kill. I think that killing is always wrong, except in weird cases like self-defense. And so if I'm right about that, this is very different from organ donation. Because in organ donation, we agree killing is wrong. You only have two legal options, help or not help. But if we take away the option to just not help, if that doesn't exist, then I think you are essentially obligated to help someone. Like, if my only two options were to either donate a pint of blood to a healthy but vulnerable person, or kill that healthy but vulnerable person. If there actually was no "I just refuse to help you" option, if we lived in a world where all I could do was help or kill, then I think you are obligated to donate that blood. No, it's not because you're generally obligated to help people. It's simply because you may not do the other thing. You may not kill innocent humans. Bodily autonomy is incredibly important. And I think that pro-life people need to spend more time in their conversations emphasizing that, yes, we believe women's bodily autonomy is incredibly important, but it does have limits. Bodily autonomy does not grant you the right to kill another innocent human. That's where that right ends. And so that's the missing piece there, is that organ donation, we're just talking about whether you have an obligation to save someone who's dying. But in pregnancy, we're not talking about whether you have an obligation to save someone who's dying. We're talking about whether or not you have a right to kill another human yourself. And that is a whole different ballgame.
So can you just kind of walk me through the strategy that you use when you're talking to a pro-choice person? What does that look like?
Sure. So let's say I'm doing an outreach on a college campus, which I very commonly do. I set up a table, should abortion remain legal in the US? And I've got questions, yes, no, it depends, hanging down, and students are coming up to me. It's a great way to start conversation with people. And you can do this out in communities too. You don't just have to be on a college campus. I work with adult pro-life clubs that will do this exact kind of table format out at their county fair or at a farmer's market in town and be able to engage with people out in the community who have different views from them. So if I have a pro-choice person who comes up to my table like that, I ask them to vote in our little poll, and usually that involves like dropping a Starburst candy in a jar that corresponds with their view. And then I say something like, we're just here trying to create more productive political dialogues because I think that people in our community generally suck at talking about difficult issues like this. So would you mind sharing with me why you voted the way that you did? And boom, they start telling me why they're pro-choice. And I focus in those first few minutes on just listening to them. And I mean that both like literally I'm listening to them and I'm trying to catalog what they're saying in my brain. And I also mean I want them to notice that I'm listening to them. I focus really hard on my body language, like that I'm just looking really relaxed and like I'm just kind of taking it in. Maybe I'm kind of nodding along with things they say. I'm making eye contact, but not like weird levels of eye contact, but like genuine, yeah, I'm just taking in what you're saying, kind of eye contact. And then when they look like they're kind of they're wrapping up their little spiel about why they're pro-choice, I do not launch into an argument. The first thing I do is I ask them a clarification question about something I just heard them say to let them know, hey, I'm really trying to understand where they're coming from. And sometimes I'll even say that too. Sometimes I'll literally say, okay, yeah, I really want to make sure I'm understanding where you're coming from. I heard you say X. Can you expand more on that? Like, what do you mean by blah, 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 whatever they said? I really want them to know at the end of the first 5 minutes of our conversation, I care so much about understanding where they're coming from. Then after they've answered that question, usually I'll point out a piece of common ground with something that they said. Be like, I really liked how you brought up whatever. Maybe they brought up women in poverty and say, I'm really concerned about that too. I think our society just really lacks effective resources to help people escape cycles of poverty. I think people just really get stuck in it. And even when they're trying really hard, it can be impossible to get out because, childcare costs so much in our country and it's really, really hard to be able to get ahead if you have to pay for so much childcare and maybe it's hard to get housing. I don't know, like I'm spitballing here, but I'm trying to just show them, hey, yeah, I agree with some of those things you said. I don't agree that abortion is a okay solution to those things, but I'm hearing you. And after I've pointed out some common ground, I often use the phrase, but where I get kind of stuck is, I love that phrase. Where I get kind of stuck is a great segue from, I have common ground with so much of what you said, but here's why I don't agree with your conclusion. It allows me to get to there without literally saying the words, here's why I don't agree with your conclusion. I say, where I get stuck is, meaning there's this piece, this other argument in my brain that doesn't quite allow me to get there. So it might be something like, where I get stuck is that I feel like if I was thinking about, maybe a preschooler whose parents were in poverty, I don't feel like I would be okay with saying you can kill a preschooler in order to deal with what's a really, really genuinely difficult situation that someone's in poverty. And I feel like abortion is like that. I think abortion is killing an innocent human. I'm guessing you probably wouldn't agree with me about that, though. What do you think? Where are you coming from there? So I use that phrase, but here where I get stuck is to kind of transition into here's a very basic, very tiny argument, a very little glimpse into where I'm coming from and why I don't agree with you. And I allow them to then react to that and inevitably tell me in that example, like, why they think I'm crazy that preschoolers are not the same as fetuses. So abortion is not killing. And that starts us then down the path of, okay, why do they think differently about abortion specifically? Maybe they think that it's a woman's right to her body, that she has the ability to remove this thing. That's not really killing, just giving her back her rights. Or maybe they say something along the lines of, a fetus isn't developed, it doesn't have a brain, so it's not really killing what's going on there. Whatever it is, I am using this to now continue gathering information about what's driving their view. And ultimately, I'm trying to get them to reveal to me exactly why they are pro-choice in a very boiled down kind of way. Because there's really only two ultimate reasons to be pro-choice, whether they realize it or not. Either they have to think that the unborn is not a human person like you and I, who should have rights. Or they think that it doesn't matter because a woman's right to her body grants her the right to do whatever she wants, even if it is a human that we're talking about. She would have the right to have an abortion regardless. Those are the only two reasons to be pro-choice. There can be a whole bunch of other distracting reasons, like I'm concerned about poverty, I'm concerned about rape, I'm concerned about overpopulation. Like there's a million distracting reasons, but ultimately it boils down to either what is the nature of this human or what are the nature of women's rights. And so if I can get them to slowly reveal to me which one of those two things is the ultimate driver, the root of their being pro-choice, then we can address that exact argument for them rather than getting constantly stuck in all these kind of distracting issues. So ultimately, I'm asking questions. I'm trying to whittle us down to what is that root and then be able to address that root concern that they have. Oftentimes, if I'm thinking about kind of the overarching scheme of a conversation, I end up going from one root cause to the other because most pro-choice people have a little bit of both going on in them somewhere. Like maybe they come in with a primary concern about women's bodily autonomy, and we really do get down to that, and I'm able to make some arguments about why bodily autonomy doesn't justify killing. They ultimately then will realize, well, wait a minute, I guess I don't really think it's killing because a fetus isn't a person after all. And now we've jumped topics. We're in that second camp of root cause. Or sometimes it goes the other way around. We start in the first camp of root cause. I demolish that argument, and then we end up in the second camp. But either way, I'm usually eventually am getting to both of them. And only once I've been able to address both of those root causes does someone typically change their mind and become pro-life. And also, you want to give them the time to do that. We're talking 30-minute typical conversations I'm having, sometimes longer. And it's even better if you can do it over more than one day. Most people don't have the humility to change their minds about a serious issue in one conversation. Because if this is something serious that you've believed for like your whole life, you need some time to think and digest. And so it's much better when I can talk to someone, get a little bit of the way in the conversation, and then have another conversation with them another day and another conversation with them another day. And that's an amazing perk of being in a community where you can do outreach repeatedly. Like when I was doing it weekly on my college campus, I was seeing a lot of the same students over and over. They would keep coming up to our table because let's face it, most people eat lunch about the same time. And so they would keep seeing us. They would keep coming up, keep asking questions. And over time, you can make a huge impact on them by really being able to get to the root of what's causing them to be pro-choice.
I really like your point about taking things like in steps and investing over time, because I think often we think of this as like, I need to change someone's mind right away, and if I don't change their mind on the spot, like I've accomplished nothing. But like you're saying, the reality is that persuasion does not always happen right away. It happens slowly. I think that's super important for us as pro-life advocates to remember. A question that just came to me is, if you could only use one pro-life argument or one kind of specific line of reasoning, is there one that you would choose that you think is like the best or the most effective?
So my personal favorite pro-life argument, the one that I have seen change more minds than any others, is one we teach at ERI called the equal rights argument. And the equal rights argument is really an argument around why a fetus should be considered a person like you and I. So while I hear the majority of pro-choice people being concerned about bodily autonomy of women, and that's typically where my conversations spend a lot of their time, we ultimately end up getting to a place where we do have to talk about the nature of the unborn because they'll agree with me, fine, women's bodily autonomy doesn't give them the right to kill, but we're not really killing a valuable thing here in an abortion. So I have to prove why the unborn is a valuable thing that should have rights. In order to do that, as I said, I use the equal rights argument. In equal rights argument, basically, in a nutshell, if I was to, teach you the 2-minute version, what it looks like is first setting abortion to the side. I literally say, can we just put abortion on the shelf for a minute? Because I want to understand how you think about rights more generally. What I'm trying to do here is show the pro-choice person that they think about abortion differently than literally every other issue. So we put abortion on the shelf, and I say, do you think that it's important for people to have equal protection from violence? They always say yes. And I can spend a couple minutes talking about some common ground here. I agree with them. I think it's important for people to have equal protection from violence. And so what I want to do next, step 2, once I've put abortion on the shelf, is to kind of establish this concept of, I call it the Equal Right to Life Club. There's this club or this group or this room, and everything inside of it has an equal right to be protected from violence, and everything outside of it doesn't. So I'll say something like, what if we made the concept of equality tangible in some way? What if we imagined we had this equal right to life club, where everything inside of the club has an equal right to be protected from violence, and everything outside of the club doesn't? I feel like it's really obvious that you and I, we would be in the equal right to life club, right? It's equally wrong for someone to kill you as it is for them to kill me. Cool. We're on the same page about that. I think I could extend that to all human adults. All human adults are in the equal right to life club. What about human infants? Are human infants 3, 4 months old? Are they in the equal right to life club? Yes. Pro-choice person always agrees with me about that. The last thing I ask them about is, what about squirrels? Are squirrels in the equal right to life club? I have never talked to a pro-choice person in real life that thinks that squirrels are in the Equal Right to Life Club. And I have talked to some serious animal rights activists in downtown Portland, okay? I have talked to animal rights activists. Even the staunchest animal rights activist doesn't literally think that squirrels are the same thing as us. They think that squirrels should be given more rights than squirrels currently have. Okay. But they don't think that squirrels are literally the same as us. They don't belong in the Equal Right to Life Club with you and I and 3, 4-month-old babies. So once we've established that, I move on to step 3, where I ask why. Why is it that certain entities are in the Equal Right to Life Club? You and I both agreed. Human adults are in, human infants are in, squirrels aren't. Why is that? There must be some trait, some reason, some thing that all of the entities have who are in the club that the entities outside of the club don't have. They don't share that thing. There has to be something that is granting them access to the club. And I'll ask them what they think that could be. And pro-choice people will give me a variety of answers, the ability to perceive the world around you, or self-awareness, or the ability to love and have relationships. I get all sorts of answers from pro-choice people. Every single answer you're going to get from a pro-choice person is one of 2 problems. Either it is a trait that is so broad that even squirrels can do it, the minimal ability to be aware of the world, squirrels can do that. So that would have to mean that squirrels would be in the club. And that's a problem. And I will point that out to them in the least snarky way possible. Or they'll give me a trait that is so advanced that human infants can't do it. Because let's face it, squirrels are way more advanced than human infants in pretty much every way for a good long time. And so they have the opposite problem. If they say things like self-awareness, the ability to know yourself and reflect on your existence. I'm sorry, I have a 7-month-old baby right now. She can't even do that. You don't have self-awareness until about 18 months old. And so if self-awareness is the thing that makes you have equal rights, then it would have to be okay to kill babies up to 18 months old, because babies up to 18 months old can't do that. There is this problem with every single possible answer that pro-choice people give, till ultimately I reveal what I believe the answer is. That I think that something like our human nature is the only thing that makes sense. It's the only thing that sorts correctly. that explains why human adults and human infants have rights and squirrels don't. Is there something like this shared human nature we have that is granting rights? And that matters because fetuses have that too. And because they are members of the species Homo sapiens, they're equally human. And I think that all humans should have rights. Not all humans, except for this one group of humans who it would be wildly inconvenient for us to give rights to. Those humans don't give rights, but all of the other humans get rights. You see how that gets kind of discriminatory. And when I show them that all pro-choice arguments are inherently discriminatory and don't make sense with what we already believe about equality, like ultimately the only way to be pro-equality and consistent about it is to be pro-life. That's where I see minds ultimately change. When they see what they already believe makes sense with the pro-life position, not with the pro-choice one.
I'm also a big fan of the equal rights argument, and I think it's helpful to think of appealing to the values that the pro-choice person already has, right? You're showing them that the pro-life view is actually already aligned with their values. They're just not being consistent, and I think that argument does a great job of that. So we've talked about, how we know that pro-life apologetics actually is effective. We actually can change people's minds, and why that's important no matter what community you're a part of, even if you're somewhere like Grove City College. But before we wrap up, I kind of want to hear any advice or maybe any words of encouragement that you would have for listeners who are on board with that and they want to get involved with learning pro-life apologetics and going out and having conversations with people, but they're unsure of, do I have what it takes? Can I actually do this and be effective? Is it worthwhile? They're hesitant for some reason. I think a lot of people fall into that category. I know I, in the past, was very scared of having conversations with strangers about abortion. It can be a very daunting thing. So what's kind of your encouragement to people who are in that camp? They want to do this, but something's holding them back.
You do not have to have all of the answers. You're not going to have all of the answers. I can tell you that right now. I have been doing this full time for years and I still don't have all of the answers. But you need to have faith that you are making a greater impact than you know. And there's this girl, her name is Anna, who reminds me of that. Anna was a pro-choice student that I met back when I was doing outreach. And she had a conversation with me. I don't know, it was like 20 minutes long. Then she had to go to class. It was nothing special. I truly don't think I said anything profound in that conversation. We talked a little bit about some bodily autonomy arguments, I think, though I barely remember that original conversation I had with her. She left. I kind of forgot it had ever happened. I truly didn't think I had made any difference that day. And then about 3 months later, I got a Facebook message from Anna. I do not use Facebook, but I still had the Facebook Messenger app on my phone and I saw this notification pop up and I was like, what is happening? So I opened it and it was from Anna. She said, "Hey, I'm sure you don't remember me, but we talked at your pro-life club outreach table about a couple months ago and I have to write a paper for a class. I was wondering if I could interview you." I was like, "Sure. Happy to talk to you." Okay. So I met her at the pizza place that was on campus. And she walked in, she sat down, and I will never forget the very first thing that she said to me. She said, "I have not been able to stop thinking about that argument you made." And I was so taken aback. I was like, I don't even remember what argument I made. Okay. I don't think I said anything special in that conversation. I did not feel equipped. I had just started doing this. This was my sophomore year, by the way. We had barely started doing outreach. I had very little experience at that point. But she said, "I have not been able to stop thinking about that argument you made." I do have to write a paper for a class. I'm supposed to interview someone who disagrees with me about a topic and write about the experience, which, by the way, is a really cool assignment. If you're a professor out there listening to this, you should assign that to your students. It's an awesome task. But anyways, I have to interview someone. And so I do really want to interview you. But mostly I asked you because I have more questions. I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said, and I would just love to talk to you more about abortion. And so I sat there for 2 hours in that pizza parlor and I talked to her about abortion. And at the end of the 2 hours, she sat back in her chair and said, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think I have to be pro-life now. Like, I cannot think of a single thing to say against these arguments you've made. Now, Anna is special to me, yes, because she changed her mind in front of my face. That's wonderful and special. But that does happen if you do this enough. The reason Anna sticks out in my mind is because I believe there are so many other Annas out there that I never had the privilege to talk to a second time. So many other people who were affected by your conversation in a way that you will never get to see. Who literally sat in their dorm room for several months not being able to stop thinking about that one little argument you made. You are not going to have all the answers. But just being out there, just being able to give people one little nugget of something, and being kind to pro-choice people, being the very first pro-life person they've ever met who said something both loving and intelligent that caused them to be like, whoa, that's interesting, and then think about it later. You might be the reason that that pro-choice person is now willing to talk to their pro-life aunt, who they've been refusing to have this conversation with for years. All because you just said one tiny thing. You didn't have all the answers, and you didn't change their mind in a day. But you can set people down a path, and most of them you are never going to get to see again. Most Annas are not going to message you. But Anna gives me so much hope and reminds me when I go out and do outreach on college campuses today and I talk to tons of people that I'm never going to get to see again, that this is still incredibly worth it because you can just plant seeds. And those seeds, I promise, will get to do something beautiful.
That's an incredible story. Emily, where can people go to follow the work that you're doing with Equal Rights Institute?
So equalrightsinstitute.com is for sure the easiest place to go because it's a landing page for absolutely all of our materials. So if you just go to equalrightsinstitute.com, you'll have links to our blog where we're constantly publishing articles, helping people understand different kinds of pro-choice arguments. You'll find our YouTube channel, same thing. We've got videos coming out constantly. I personally run our ERA social media accounts. If you're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, I'm making daily reels responding to different pro-choice arguments. So even just following that can give you some tools for little things that you can say to different kind of pro-choice things that might come across your feeds. We also have online courses. We've talked about the Equip for Life course already. It's the course that changed my life. It's the course that really helped Lily set down this path too. And so if you're interested in that, you can find that online. We also have a sidewalk counseling course online. If you're someone that wants to get involved talking to women outside of abortion facilities, that's a whole different kind of conversation. So we've got a course for that. And we also have our new Equip for Life Academy, which is a curriculum meant for Christian high school students to really help address that problem that I had in my own high school, where I assumed that everyone was pro-life, and so we didn't really engage with the issue of abortion effectively. We want to help religious high schools to be able to talk about this issue in such a way that equips their students to go out and be effective advocates on their future college campuses and in their future workplaces. So all of those things you can just find straight on our website, Equal Rights Institute. Otherwise, you could go directly to any social media platform, search for Equal Rights Institute, search for it on YouTube. Everywhere is just under that name, and you will see my face.
Thank you. Well, we covered a lot of ground, I think, in this conversation. I think this is going to help a lot of people who watch this video. So thank you so much, Emily. It's been great talking with you.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Breaking the Narrative. Stay tuned for more from the Institute for Faith and Freedom.